everybody, and welcome to another episode of Truth Wanted. I'm your host, ObjectivelyDan. And joining me today is a very special guest, folks. This is a historic episode in the legacy that is Truth Wanted, because this is our very first Christian guest, Christian co-host on the show. This is Craig Reed, otherwise known as Craig Reed Holy on Twitter, and he is joining me today. And we're just going to see how this goes, man. I don't know. What do you think, Craig?
I think we're going to tear it up, Dan. I think we're going to set it on fire, and it's going to go well. And you and I do really well, so I don't anticipate any trouble.
Maybe I don't either, man.
But we'll be on the same team somehow.
That's right. I think so. But for those of you who don't know Craig, I would call him a friend. He's a friend of mine. Craig and I have gone back and forth a few times. He called into the show actually a few times. That's the first time I actually met Craig, and we talked a bit more from there. I also talked to him on his channel. But Craig's an interesting dude. Craig is a Christian who has a channel on YouTube where, from what I see, mostly interviews a lot of atheists, just kind of has conversations with them, and it's really chill, really laid back. He's also big on Twitter. He likes to follow others and get in talks with the atheist community on there. And he's just a chill guy, just a really chill guy. So my first question for Craig is Craig, how did you get into this position where you're at now? You know, you're kind of this Christian that hangs out with a bunch of atheists. I think that's pretty cool, but that's really not that typical.
Well, it kind of developed organically. It didn't really occur to me to have a Twitter feed for a while. I was on Twitter and didn't really know how to use it. As embarrassing as that sounds, I was on Twitter for 2 years and had no idea what to do. But way back when I was a Christian, maybe 7 years ago, I used to go on YouTube and watch Jacqueline Glenn, The Amazing Atheist. There was this girl, Christina Rad, Thunderfoot. So I would watch these YouTube videos, YouTube atheists, mostly for entertainment. I thought Amazing Atheist was pretty witty. Ditto for Jacqueline Glenn. Christina Rad I really liked. Thought she was attractive, thought she was cool. And then I started, she's definitely easy on the eyes. I got to say that.
All right. Let's slow down. Slow your roll, Craig.
We'll keep it calm. So I started a Twitter feed, and then in the Twitter feed, I started doing makeshift apologetics. You know how there's all these conversations on Twitter. And I just sort of started a YouTube channel along with it, but I didn't really think much in terms of strategy or anything like that. And then one day I just got not necessarily tired of the back and forth on Twitter, but it had a lot to do with Shannon. Shannon had put out a video. I saw her first video that she put out. And she was talking about...
That's Shannon Q that you're talking about, for those who aren't aware, who also has a YouTube channel out there. Yeah.
Yes, and she put out a video, and I watched it, and it was about, improving the conversations. And I actually didn't know her then, but I totally agreed with it. And I put out a video saying, I agree with this Shannon person. And then somewhere along the way, I started meeting, I met Drew through, I think, Godless Cranium, invited him on my channel. But
that's genetically modified skeptic, for those who don't know, yes.
Yeah, my whole approach was different. I didn't want to have debates. I invite atheists on my channel to just talk to them, find out, who they are, why they became an atheist. Just mainly with Drew, I just went into his background, and with you, same idea. And that's kind of how we met. I think it was when you were doing you weren't actually live. I think you were doing practice rounds.
Yes.
And he told me to call you up.
Mm-hmm.
So I called you up, and then we got along pretty well. And then you came on the show. And then that was the whole genesis of that. I would invite atheists on the show more or less to have conversations rather than to have, let's debate. No, you're an atheist. Well, you're wrong. There's, there was a lot of that going on Twitter, and I actually don't like it. I found it really unproductive.
Yeah, and there are definitely channels out there who are like, oh, we don't want to debate, we just want to talk. And then they actually end up debating and having arguments and stuff. But your channel was generally just a real conversation. It was just really cool, and it just really, really chill. So I definitely recommend you watch that conversation if you're interested. But I want to go back just a little bit, because you use that label Christian, and not everybody uses the label Christian the same way. So I'm interested, I guess, in your story of how you came to use that label, because as I understand it, you weren't always a Christian. You didn't actually grow up a Christian.
No, not at all. I grew up I mean, technically I was Roman Catholic, but it was nominally. We went to church on Christmas and Easter,
Hmm.
and nobody expected me to actually believe the faith. They would have been really surprised if I came home and said, I'm really tracking with this Jesus thing. They would have been like, huh? Maybe we shouldn't let him go to church at Easter anymore.
Yeah.
I grew up in a really, really, really secular left-wing town. One of the most in the country, actually. I didn't know it at the time. Nobody knows that they grow up in a place that's unusual. But of the town I grew up in was Westchester. It's called Hastings. It was pretty much like growing up in Berkeley or Provincetown, or it's one of those type of places. And most of them were Jewish growing up, and there was no such thing as an evangelical Christian, none, which is probably really, really weird for you,
Mm.
because there were probably half the people you grew up with were evangelical Christians.
Oh yeah.
I didn't know any. I didn't know any. There were people who I interacted with who were Christian the way I was, like, this guy's a Protestant. They go to church on Easter and Christmas. But there was no such thing as a witnessing Christian in the entire school. There was a rumor that one girl became a Christian later on, this girl, Quinn.
Mm.
And it weirded everybody out, honestly. So fast forward, what am I telling you actually? How I became a Christian?
Yeah, how you became a Christian? Why? Because you said you grew up pretty much secular, at least in a secular area.
Well,
So
I would say entirely secular.
okay.
That has a lot to do with why, when you and I talk, there's a lot of sacred cows of Christianity that I don't notice or even know about because I wasn't raised in it. So I was raised almost completely secular. So, the Bible wasn't considered a holy book where I grew up. It was probably more an atheist interpretation. Matter of fact, one time my mom paid me $20 to protest on the side of pro-choice. They were trying to shut down an abortion clinic, and my mom gave me like $20 to come with her to
Ah.
defend, be pro-choice. And I started, interacting with the fundamentalists, and the stuff I said was straight out of the atheist playbook. I was like, the Bible got it wrong, creationism is wrong, and I got into this long conversation. I wound up actually even then getting into a really productive conversation with this monk. Really liked the guy. And then fast forward, somewhere in my 20s, I became very, very interested in the idea of whether there was a God or not. But so I started seeking. But I didn't start with Christianity. I read like the Bhagavad Gita, the Tao Te Ching, got into a lot of New Age stuff, and then met my wife at the time, who was a Christian but didn't tell me, and I didn't know she was a Christian. And then she wanted to move out to California. And to make a long story short, she invited me to church one night. She went to this thing. I think his name is Benny Hinn. She went, and I encouraged her to go when we were in New York. She
You
called him a
went to see
spiritual
Benny
healer.
Hinn? Really?
Yes, and I had no idea who that was at the time. No idea. Never heard the name. Like I said, the only Christian I knew of growing up was Jim Bakker. Like that's the only Christians I had heard of were the ones who were household names because of scandals. So she mentioned this guy, and I had no idea who it was, but I encouraged her to go because she described him as a spiritual healer. And I was really into like New Age stuff at the time. So I said, yeah, that sounds positive. Go check it out. And then she comes back and she tells me she rededicated her life to the Lord. I had no idea what that meant. No idea. I'm like, oh, that's cool, sweetheart. That sounds good. And then we move out to California, and she's becoming more Christian as we move out here. And then there's a church here called the Malibu Vineyard, which is now defunct. And she tells me to come that one night. And I wanted to get out of work, so I agreed to go with her. And I mean, to make a long story short, there was this prophet there. I don't remember his name. And he kind of started saying all this stuff to me that was really intense. And it really struck a chord and hit home. And I started crying when he started prophesying over me. It wasn't really prophesying in the sense of like, you're going to meet this guy, Dan, and you're going to be on a radio show, and you're going to be a great man of God, and Dan is going to, it wasn't like that. It wasn't specific. It was, you've been in this war your whole life, and I forget exactly what he said, but it really struck a chord with me. And I started crying and became a Christian that night. And then from there, I've been a really, really, really like, I guess, a strong Christian, I guess you would say, which can be surprising to people because I'm really kind of laid back and easygoing. So partially because of how I was raised. I don't do the standard, whatever it is that most Christians trip out on you about when you say you're an atheist, I don't do.
Yeah.
Because I was raised to automatically go whatever I'm supposed to go. So I don't, I'm actually a really pretty strong Christian though. I just not necessarily downplay it, but I'm a bit more mellow about it in actual approach, especially with people who are non-believers, because I recognize that it sounds, even some of the things I was starting to say probably sound outlandish, not to you because you were raised Christian, but to people in the audience who are atheists, probably already starting to sound a little bit out there, I would guess. Does that answer?
Yeah, for sure. Okay, I knew that you had told me once before that you had met a prophet and had told you the things. I had no idea you met Benny Hinn, dude. That's crazy.
No, I didn't meet him at the time. She went to his crusade.
Oh, she went, but you didn't go. You didn't go with her. Okay.
No, she came back and said, I rededicated my life to the Lord. And I was like,
gotcha. Okay, you weren't with her at the time. Okay, I was about to ask you some questions about Benny Hinn. I'll be real. That was really an interesting tangent. But I want to go back just a bit, and because you use this word Christian, and like I was saying before, Christian does mean different things to different people. So when you say that you're a Christian now, what does that word kind of mean to you?
I mean, in terms of actual practicing faith, it means I believe in God and I believe that Jesus was who he said he was. But I practice my Christianity, as you noticed, a lot differently than most of the other people. It means I believe in God and I pray all the time and try to seek God's will for my life. But I wind up in a really different place than most of the other people who call themselves Christian.
I would say so. I would say so because,
you noticed that right off the bat, correct? When you and I, like when you first came on the show, you didn't know who I was necessarily when you came on my channel. And we just had a cool conversation about how you went from Christian to atheist.
Yeah.
As far as I could tell, you were not defensive at all. I didn't put you on the spot.
No, I don't think so. And I really like your channel for that. I wish there were definitely more Christian channels that do that sort of thing. But like now that you're on the other side of this, I guess, or you're kind of having these conversations with atheists, why do you think it is that you do see that with other kinds of Christians? Do you think it's an element of fear? Do you think it's an element of like defensiveness, or what do you think?
What a great question! Wow, God, that's such a great question. I could answer that for 5 hours. There's a lot of stuff going on. First of all, if you're raised Christian, there's an automatic defense. Like you grew up in a town where everybody's Christian. Let's take Drew as my go-to example. Oftentimes I use Drew. Drew grew up, everyone he hung out with was Christian. He was like a church leader probably. Most of his family is Christian. So he becomes an atheist. That's an automatic, it puts everybody else on the defense without him trying to. It's kind of like an open rebuke. He's not necessarily coming out and saying, I disagree with all of you and all your value system, but by definition, he kind of is. So there's a defensiveness there. I don't experience it at all because I wasn't raised with Christians. So I meet him, he goes, I'm an atheist, and I don't automatically go, I got to defend myself against you and say, because I wasn't raised Christian. So it doesn't even occur to me that I'm even supposed to care if there wasn't this environment with this unnatural, every time you meet an atheist on Twitter, they're supposed to challenge you and you're supposed to fight back. And every time you meet an atheist on YouTube, you know what I mean? The game out there.
No, for sure.
If that game exists, it wouldn't have even occurred to me to care that Drew is an atheist. I just ask him, I'd be curious. Okay, how'd that happen? Why? And that's what I did on my channel. Other people are trained up, one by the church, to defend the faith, right? Which you've experienced firsthand. You were a Christian, right? Don't they teach? Don't they kind of tell you a lot? They propagandize you about what atheists are and what they're doing, and you got to go defend.
In the Baptist circles that I was a part, in the evangelical circles, yeah, for sure. I wouldn't say that for all of them, but yeah.
The other thing is, I'm not a very dogmatic person. I wasn't a dogmatic person before I was a Christian either. I was really easygoing, and I used to pride myself on being able to interact freely in my high school, I knew everybody, every crowd, and I could float in and out of different crowds. And I kind of prided myself on that my whole life. Nothing's changed along those lines. When I meet an atheist, I don't automatically think other, defend Christianity, prove that God is real. It doesn't even occur to me to think that way. So why of that is, it's interesting. It's worth exploring. But that's the first thing I would say.
That is worth exploring. That is so cool. It's interesting because, like I said, I'm not used to hearing that, at least from other Christians. I have my own explanations of why other Christians behave the way they do based on my past experiences, based on knowing other people and stuff. And it does kind of, it vindicates me in a way to hear like you as a still practicing believer say like, yes, I agree with you with all of these things. Like these things are going on in these people's heads because this is what I assume is happening. But speaking as an atheist, I suddenly become, an outsider, like a critic to that sort of thing. And to some people that might lose my legitimacy in a sense, because it's kind of like, you're not part of this in-group. So you are criticizing it as someone on the outside.
Right, as the outsider.
Right.
And sometimes they're right. I mean, it's different with you, Drew, Shannon, and Cirrus, and a bunch of other people who I met. Mm-hmm. You can have real conversations with them. That's not true of every other atheist. There are dogmatic atheists out there who won't let you have a conversation like this from my point of view either. You know what I mean? They'll do the same thing. Sure. Like I've been invited on YouTube channels where, like you said, the guy's like, it's just a chill conversation. You're just going to, and then all they did was try to challenge and discredit me every single time I opened my mouth.
Right.
And I don't do it because first of all, even if my goal is evangelical, let's assume that I do think that that's my job. I think it's a much smarter approach to just be as laid back and get along with people first, establish a rapport, establish a common bond. Then they'll listen to you. First off, they may never accept that you walk with God or that God is real, but at least you're not putting them off.
You said
one, right?
Yeah, for sure. I want to ask you about something. You said it's your job to basically evangelize. Is that how you feel about like talking to me right now or talking to other atheists? Do you think that is your goal ultimately to convince other people of being Christians, or is it just wanting to see what other people are about?
Well, in this conversation, it's way more complicated and nuanced than that.
Okay.
If let's say my overall goal is to evangelize, let's just say that I do kind of see that, planting seeds for God or something. The best way to do it in this situation is just take a chill. Just have a conversation, not be as, exploratory as possible and see where we wind up. Do you see what I'm saying? Like that would be almost a strategic choice. I mean, it's what I would do automatically anyways. You interact with other people, that should be your first goal, is to relate.
Sure.
Duh.
Yeah.
When you're on a show with somebody, your first goal should be to relate to them. Duh. To me, that's basic common sense. It's not common sense that everybody else follows, but it's basic common sense as far as I'm concerned. But no, overall, I would say evangelical in a general sense means, build a channel that atheists feel comfortable listening to. People who don't agree with me can at least like or don't find me hostile or in their face.
Yeah.
That's what I mean.
Okay. So
being an
I want.
ambassador.
Yeah, for sure. I want to encourage everybody. This is a call-in show. Go ahead and call in. We have a few open lines so that you can talk to me or ask Craig some questions. This is a special opportunity. We don't often have theist co-hosts on, and this is one of those nights. I want to get to some calls in a second, but again, please keep them coming in. But I want to bring up something we brought up really quickly once in the past. I think you were calling me one time on this show, and you said something along the lines of like, yeah, most apologetics are bullshit. And I kind of want to explore that a little bit. It was something along those lines. That's not a direct quote, but I think you agreed with the sentiment that a lot of the apologetics, or at least Christian apologetics that you knew of, you either disagreed with or just thought were just total baloney to some degree. Do you still hold to that position, or?
Yes, on a lot of there's some that have grains of truth in them, and that's what I'm trying to do in my videos. It's not quite clear yet because I'm taking the long-term approach. But there are some things like Alvin Plantinga, I think his name is, with the He's got some interesting stuff where he talks about Christian belief is properly basic. It's not correct as he frames it, but it's heading towards something correct. There are a couple other arguments in there that are decent, but as they are framed, no, they are not successful. And what I tried to explain to you the first time I was on your channel, if they were successful, that would be it. You're not an unreasonable human being. Neither is, let's take Cirrus. Shannon would still be Shannon. It should be annoying. But let's take Cirrus. If you came up with an apologetic that actually proved God was real, the guy would not be an atheist anymore. He would fight it for a month or two, but he'd come back and go, I can't see the logical flaw in this. Therefore, I don't know how God is real yet, but I accept on some level that the logic is sound. Therefore, God does exist somehow. That's what would happen. It would be game over. Because it's a zero-sum game. We can't both be right. Either God can't exist and not exist at the same time. So ultimately, one of us is wrong. That could be why these conversations get contentious.
Do you think that we've found that apologetic that you're talking about? Like, do you think that argument exists? No, you don't think so?
No, I don't think I think there are some that have potential, but as they're framed, no, they're not successful. And usually the atheist pointing out what's not successful is, the first time when I started, I was new to apologetics when I started my channel. I didn't really know a lot about it. So I was really excited to William Lane Craig. I was like, cool, this is going to be game changing. And I was so disappointed in the actual, when I first read the Kalam cosmological argument, I thought he was kidding. I was like, is that it? Are you serious? And then there's the other one where they're like, you can't imagine the best of, I forget there's one that I couldn't even believe that the people were throwing out as an actual argument. The Kalam, it doesn't work. The flaws in them are pretty obvious on first reading. I don't want to be too controversial if Christians are watching.
No, keep it up. I love this stuff. This is the best. No, that's, I like, because you are saying this, right? There's something there that I can't have back anymore. It's like I said, I'm not in the position that you're at anymore. I'm not a believer anymore. So me saying I don't think the Kalam works, that's a different dynamic than you saying that the Kalam doesn't work.
Right, but the thing that the atheist points out, usually at the beginning of the Kalam, everything that exists has a cause. Okay, that's an assertion. That needs to be proved, first off. You can't just say that. How do you know? There's a lot all of them have flaws. And the other thing, even someone like Matt Dillahunty, ultimately, I don't think he's all that unreasonable. If you had a conversation with him where you're actually making reasoned arguments, I don't think he would really fight you too hard if you were dealing in the truth, if you were heading towards something that was true and you didn't deviate from truth. The problem with most other apologetics is they take a leap of faith somewhere. Let's assume for argument's sake that I know that God is real. Okay. And let's assume I learned that by faith. If I'm trying to demonstrate it to you using logic, I can't take a leap of faith anywhere in there, right? Right?
Yeah, I mean, depends on your definition of faith, because I do hear apologists that try to argue that faith is this other thing that we pretend like we don't use it for, even though most people use it for a different thing. Like faith is like a logically conclusive belief, basically,
Right, but even there, even when there's a good argument buried in there, the Christian usually goes too far to try to make it case closed, game over, before it's actually case closed. Gotcha. The argument should develop organically, and it should be honest with every tier, and it should not have a flaw in it. And if somebody stops you who's smart and credible and goes, hey, there's a flaw, then you have to stop the argument.
Okay, really, we do have to get to the calls here, but I just got one more question that's burning on my mind here.
Go for it.
Because you're saying that you're not convinced that there are these arguments that exist, at least for Christianity, that are bunk, in your opinion, like that don't work. Is there an argument that you think does work that convinces you, or is your belief not based on any kind of argument in that sense?
No, that's why this will get too complicated to go into now. But no, my belief didn't come from nobody argued to me God existed, and I went, aha, that makes sense.
Okay.
I had a direct experience with the Holy Spirit, and it was real to me. That's why I became a Christian. That's a very different thing.
Okay.
Now there may be an argument buried in there but it's buried in there. Take time. I'm
Gotcha.
going to call the other guy, the guys who do the. Don't they do longer term things? The Heathen Hour or something? Is that
You're
what
talking
they're
about
called?
Talk Heathen. Yeah.
Yes, yes. Don't they want people to have long conversations and call back a few times? Am I getting that right?
I mean, sure. Yeah, you could do that, but you got to pay attention to here. We're on Truth Wanted tonight, Craig. Hold on. Don't
Okay.
be moseying over to
Yeah.
any other ACA productions tonight. Okay.
So
Plus,
watch that, everybody. No.
they
Okay,
do
go
their
ahead.
things on Sundays. So anyway, we do have some callers on the line. I want to get to these now. This is Craig Reed. He is a Christian, and he has graciously come on the show so we could kind of talk about that. Come with your questions. The lines are open, and the number is on the screen. Are you ready to take some calls here?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay,
Let's
cool.
do it.
One more thing before we do that as well. We have an ad that we want to get to. This is for our upcoming Atheist Day. It's going to be here in Austin, Texas. And I'll just let the video play. So check it out.
Around the world, secular groups are gathering this March to celebrate the first International Atheist Day. While we encourage atheist groups to come together and celebrate, we invite you to join us. Because lacking religion does not constitute hate. Because in many parts of the world, disbelief can have tragic consequences. Because it's time to create an international community. Because where we can be counted, we should. Stand up this March 23rd and join us as we demand to be counted.
All right. Yeah, be sure to join us out on Atheist Day. That's going to be really, really fun. Now we're going to get to some calls, so let's get to it. This is coming from John, who lives in Arnold. It's M.O. I can't remember the state code for M.O. Arnold M.O., wherever that's at. Anyway, John wants to ask us if Jesus is magic, is what I have written here, and is the name Jesus given to archetypical humans, which is the king of magic. This is an interesting little thing here, John. You're going to have to explain this to me a bit more.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
All right. Well, basically, I don't think that Jesus Christ's power came from any God. I think it came from his humanity. And I think that we're all capable of doing those same miracles if we just have faith in ourselves and train hard enough.
Really? Interesting. So
Yeah.
you think like you can walk on water, for example?
I do, but I think it's tedious to spend my life training to do that because it's been done before and it didn't change enough people's minds. You know what I mean?
Okay. Well,
So I'm going to do something much more interesting. I just haven't fully decided what that's going to be yet.
Okay. Well, I'll tell you right now, if I saw somebody walk on water, I think it would convince me. Maybe it wouldn't convince some other people, but I think it would at least get a start with that. What do you think about this, Greg? Is this fall into your beliefs? Do you think that you could do miracles?
I mean, I kind of get where he's coming from. You're saying that if you pray hard enough and concentrate hard enough, you can exceed the limits of what is actually exceed. Is that what you're saying? That there's a human power at work here that you tap into with enough intensity, and you'll be able to accomplish what looks like miracles? Is that kind of what you meant?
I think
That's what I'm. What's that?
I've been on an extremely spiritual journey, and I've been praying with lakes and rivers and animals, and
Cool.
I think that there's more that. I think there may only really be one soul, and by tapping into that
oversoul
true
type
soul,
thing?
you have limitless power.
Okay. Is there anything you could show us, even on this call right now, to like demonstrate some of that power?
Is there anything I could do on the call? I'm not sure.
Okay.
Have you been developing the power? Like, are you talking like an oversoul, like a cosmic conscience type of thing that we all tap into? Because that's a pretty common thing. A lot of people have thought that, like the transcendentalists and people like those, Emerson, for example. And are you getting some miraculous powers? Have you been training yourself in this thing you're doing, and have you been actually getting these powers, and what are they?
So I think that I can bend air through music, and if I say the right words, I can bend people's souls and inspire them to change the world forever.
Can I ask you what you mean when you say bend people's souls?
Yeah, that's an interesting one.
I feel like when I look into a person's eyes, I can see who they really are.
Okay, so that means, does that constitute bending their soul? Like, what does the soul mean in this context? I'm not quite sure.
I think that the definition of the soul has been the thing that's eluded us as humans since the dawn of time. So, and that's kind of mainly what I've been searching for, is just what is the soul. But
you can, you can bend it at least.
I believe that I can. I don't know for sure that I can.
Okay, that's kind of interesting. Well,
I'm honest. It's skepticism is something that I've practiced for a very long time. So I very recently had a very spiritual experience where I became very convinced that God was leading my footsteps. So I honestly have. I'm pretty sure that I exist.
Okay.
And other than that, I don't really know.
Well, okay. So can you tell me how, like, maybe dive into this experience? Like, was this experience like convincing for you of these kind of beliefs that you have?
So I was standing on the street. There was a sign on the street that said Trinity, and I looked up into the sky. And in that moment, I became convinced that God was real. Later that day...
Wait, hold on. What was it about the sky that convinced you that God was real? You kind of missing me there.
It was just a feeling. I stood on the word Trinity. I ran my foot across the lettering and looked up at the sky and became convinced that God was a real thing.
Were you stoned at all? Just asking.
I'm sorry, can you say that again?
Were drugs involved in any way? I don't mean that in condescending, just asking.
No, I was completely sober at the time.
Okay. What I'm kind of, that's interesting to me, because I think I can put my foot over a sign that says Trinity or somewhere, and I can look up into the sky. I definitely feel some feelings, but I'm not sure how you get from that to concluding that God is real. Like, is there a step-by-step thing there, or is it all just kind of feeling that there's something out there?
So for the rest of the week, while I stayed in that city, every single step I took felt like it was being guided, pushed forward by some kind of force, which made me... And then I met with a lot of street people, and I would go and buy them food and drinks. And several of them called me Jesus, which was very strange.
They called you? That's what they called you?
Yes, that's what they called me, which I thought was ridiculous.
Okay, so you don't think that you are. They just thought that you might be.
Well, maybe they were just saying thank you to Jesus because somebody had fed them. I'm not sure. But at least one person called me specifically Jesus, and that was very strange.
John, do you agree with me that maybe feelings are sometimes not the most reliable way of knowing if something is true?
Oh, no, feelings are completely irrational.
Okay. Well, if you agree with me that feelings are kind of irrational and maybe not always the best way of knowing if things are true, why is it that this feeling led you to believe in something that you believe is true?
So, this feeling. That's a very fair question, because most of my feelings are completely irrational.
I think that there are people who go out on the street and actually believe that they are Jesus and like go out and say these things. And I think that they do that because they feel like they are. And I'm sure that they feel like they are. But I think you'd also agree with me that our feelings are not very good indicators of what's true. The only thing that really feelings can tell us are how we feel, right? How we feel about ourselves. I'm personally very skeptical of anybody who tells me that they think something is true because they feel something is true. I've talked to several people, for example, that say they know that karma is real because they felt like it was real and this kind of thing happened and they felt, these things going on, and none of those kinds of conversations ever convinced me that karma was a real concept. So I'm wondering if we can apply the same kind of looking glass to this belief here, this belief of God coming from these feelings, and maybe we can come to some different conclusions based on that. What do you think?
I think that I mean, we obviously can come to different conclusions because I believe in gods and you don't.
Mm-hmm.
And we've been presented largely with similar evidence, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And so I definitely believe that Jesus Christ existed.
Okay.
And I believe that he more or less did all of the things that he said he could do. Or, like, I believe that he walked on water. I believe that he fed the 5,000. I believe that he was a good person.
But you believe that
I just
those are
wonder
human things that people can tap into if they just access a different part of themselves, a spiritual part, or pray hard enough or concentrate hard enough? Is that kind of what your deal is? That's what I'm hearing. Is that right?
So I personally have been doing everything I can to walk in his footsteps. And I think the harder I try to emulate him, maybe the more of his power I can obtain.
Can you, I think I asked this earlier, but like, what's a demonstration of this power? Is there anything that you can do now that you couldn't actually do before?
Good question.
So I don't know if it's real or not, but I feel like I've talked to my friends in their dreams. Like, I feel like when I'm dreaming, I am interacting with other people.
Have you ever felt that way before you started going down this pathway of belief?
No, this is only afterwards.
Okay, well, I'll tell you this, John. I've definitely felt like I've talked to other people in my dreams. And I don't think that I have any special powers because of that. I think that talking to people in their dreams seems like a pretty common phenomenon.
When the other person shares the same experience?
Oh, okay, so that's a bit different. So you're saying your friends actually felt like they talked to you back in their dreams?
Yeah, like I feel like I've successfully communicated with other people in my dreams.
Okay, that's interesting.
Do they feel like you have? Do those people confirm that and go, yeah?
So we talk afterwards, and we've had the same dream. Maybe it's just a coincidence.
It could be. What could we do, John, do you think, that we could figure out whether or not this is a coincidence? Is there a way that we could test this?
I'm not sure. And I think that there's certain power in faith. So, like, even though I don't know that I could ever prove to you or anyone else that I have any kind of power, I think that by staying around other spiritual people, like in Harry Potter, the J.K. Rowling comes up with this thing. It's like, oh, technology messes with the magic, and that's why they live in these places. Like, maybe she's just right. Maybe the technology is what's destroying the magic.
But how do we know that the magic was there in the first place?
That's a completely fair question. And I think that that's the main thing, because I don't know if it works on people that don't believe in it, or at least not the way I do it. So it's basically impossible for me to prove to anyone that doesn't believe. So, like, evangelism is completely pointless for me.
So that's interesting, because you're saying that it wouldn't convince anybody else. But for yourself, you are still convinced of this belief. And what I seem to be getting at, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems to be because it's been a series of feelings that you had, or maybe this dream thing. But we also haven't ruled out the possibility that a lot of this could be coincidence on some level. And I'm wondering, is that something that you've ruled out, or is it still possible that this could be coincidence?
So I've been living my life under the assumption that coincidence is a farce and that it's actually all signs from God.
Why do you
but I'm
believe
also
that?
open to the possibility that that's a completely ridiculous idea.
Why do you think that's true?
Basically, my personal life is completely fallen apart, and maybe I just am falling back on these irrational beliefs to justify the unfortunate circumstances I'm experiencing in my personal life.
That's interesting. So if we were to look at this in another light, and if we were to say, hey, maybe this is all coincidences, maybe this isn't what we were thinking it was, do you think you would still be able to live your life okay? Or do you think that you need these beliefs?
So I think that I need these beliefs. Well, all of the decisions I made, I think, positively impacted a lot of people. So I don't regret any of the decisions I made.
Sure. But can you agree that we can positively impact people and still believe things that aren't true?
I do believe that, yes. So I am open to the possibility that I'm completely lost my mind. But I want to believe that...
Yeah, if you really lost your mind, then you might not be able to tell, right? But
I mean, it sounds more plausible that you're having some type of quasi delusions. If you want to know the honest God truth, it sounds like there may be spiritual experiences buried in there that could be legitimate, but some of this stuff sounds not necessarily delusional, but quasi delusional. You having a lot of religious ideology, like thinking about religion a lot. Religiosity is what they call it. Does that happen to you a lot, where you're thinking all these religious symbolic thoughts? Because that's not necessarily a sign that all is well. Do you have people you trust that you can talk to?
I do. I do believe that Jesus Christ was a good role model, and I think that there's a lot of stuff in the Bible that makes him muddies that story. Like, I think he was a really good person, and I think he tried his best to help people.
I agree.
And I think it was a crying shame that he was executed by the government.
I agree.
Well, John, this has been an interesting conversation. If you can,
I'm
I'd like
to
to
develop my ideas more and maybe call back next week.
Maybe so. I'd love for you to call back on this, John. And you know what? There's some people live in the chat right now that I'm sure would love to talk to you. And we always mention this. We have the Atheist Community of Austin Discord for those who want to keep having these conversations. I bet there are some other people who would like to talk about this too. And I hope I've given you something to think about.
You have, certainly. Have a wonderful day, Objectively Dan.
Thank you, John. You too.
Take care.
Yeah. Interesting stuff. I think in my own life, I've come under delusions of some kind as far as religious experiences. I don't know if I've ever believed that I actually had powers, though. I think that's a new one for me. I mean, obviously, I've heard other people have said this, but I never had experienced that as a Christian. Have you ever experienced that, Craig?
Where I myself had supernatural powers? No. What were some of the quasi delusions you think you had?
Well, I just think so I think that I think that the Holy Spirit was leading me in certain situations, basically. But I now attribute those experiences to either emotional duress or just basic intuition working on some kind of level. I don't think there's a supernatural component to it.
Basic intuition, that's when I was starting to talk about real apologetics, because I'm starting to look into real intuition, and there's a whole conversation there. But yes, were you under emotional duress the times you felt like you were being led?
At times, yeah. Yeah, for sure.
Because I haven't, I don't know if I posted the video yet, but I've had experiences in my life that I thought were where I was intuitive experiences where I handled like a crisis situation by instinct. And I didn't think that was necessarily God leading me at the time, but I did experience that as third party, me doing things that I didn't consciously know how to do. So I was able to protect myself in situations, getting in data from the environment that I didn't really even know how to consciously process, but it was actually real stuff.
Yeah. I think that's my naturalist explanation of that, Craig, would probably be, you know, adrenaline rushes can do some crazy things to people. And I think it brings people to do things and have abilities that they otherwise normally would not be able to do. I remember reading a story one time of a woman who was able to lift up a car because she had like her son was trapped underneath or something like that. You know, just.
I thought that's where he was going. Like he was saying, but he wasn't very clear as to what powers, and it wasn't really clear. That's why I thought he might have.
It was a little bit vague. It was a little bit vague. But yeah, I mean, John, if you're still listening, definitely would like to talk to you again. That was very, very interesting and not typically what we see here. And I like to have more conversations like that, to be honest with you. I think those are really cool. But let's go ahead and go on to our next caller here. This is Dean in North Carolina. Dean had two questions. He had one for Craig and one for me. Looks like Dean was asking why your objection to the Kalam argument, and to me, he wanted to talk about faith a bit more. Is that right, Dean?
Correct. My question for Craig is this. You said that the Kalam argument doesn't work because the initial premise is that whatever exists has a cause. And I don't want to be too hard here, but the first premise of the Kalam says that whatever begins to exist has a cause, not whatever exists has a cause. So I'm wondering, would you still agree if the first premise is whatever begins to exist has a cause? Would you still hold the position that the Kalam doesn't work, and if so, why?
I don't actually know the Kalam well enough, but the first time I read it through a few times, and I was like, okay, it doesn't work. The thing that I just threw out in the moment was just what I remembered about it. But what we were talking about was that Kalam is one of many of these apologetics that the holes that tend to get poked in them by the atheists or the skeptical people are actually the real holes of the argument. And what I was trying to point out to Dan is if there is an actual proof of God, it's going to be case closed. You can get the smartest atheist in town, who may be Dan, you know, maybe Dan's the smartest atheist, and he'll come.
Not true,
and he'll
but
try to find a poke. He'll try to poke a hole in the argument and won't. But as far as the Kalam itself, what the first premise is what? Everything that exists.
Whatever
I don't know it. Debate. What is it?
Whatever begins to exist has a cause.
Right. Is that an absolute fact? I mean, that's, in order for that to even be true, that's got to be an absolute fact. And I don't know that can't be debatable for it to be a logical proof. That's got to be A equals A, no argument. 2 + 2 = 4, no argument. It can't be everything that begins to exist has a cause. As far as we know, sure, it sounds reasonable, but not necessarily. And then you have the atheists do okay, so what caused God? And yeah, they're just being smart alecks in the moment, but it kind of debunks the whole, then what caused God? And then we, the Christian, have to play the game of, well, God doesn't get to have a cause because, and then they go, well, special pleading, and they're correct. I don't find any need to prove in a way that doesn't quite prove. I honestly believe that God is real, like almost 150%. So as far as I'm concerned, there will be such a thing as a real proof where people will be like, you know, you'll have the most atheist guy in town and he won't have crap to say about it. So
well, I
don't know if that.
I would certainly love to chat with you, you know, at some point in time about some of the things that you mentioned about the Kalam. I guess that raises another question for me then, you know, with regards to the method of evangelism that you use with someone like Dan. My question would be, so when you're talking to someone and they say, well, what evidence or what arguments would you make for the existence of God if you're not using the Kalam or the ontological argument or the teleological argument? I mean, is it one of those things where you just throw up your hands and say, well, it's because of a personal experience that I have, or because the Bible says it? I guess that's That's my question.
That's a great,
great
that's a great
question.
question.
Yeah.
That's a great question. You tell me. I don't know this, and if you want to send me stuff on the Kalam that spells it out, so I'll revisit it. I'm perfectly willing to do that and give it a second look. But have you ever seen anybody? Because I haven't. Where someone said, "What's your evidence?" and they've done an argument, and the person's gone, "Yes, I agree. I'm convinced." Because I haven't even seen anything close to it. If I saw somebody become convinced by it, I might change my opinion for sure, but I've never seen anybody. I would love to find out. There are some atheists out there or Christians out there who used to be atheists, and I'd love to hear from them why. Because, yeah, I don't know what the most convincing thing is. I'm not sure if that's my agenda. I totally hear what you're saying. I think it's a great question.
Yeah, so I actually, and maybe we can talk offline about that. I mean, how would you, and I don't want to put, I guess I will put Dan on the spot. How would you, if you were talking to Dan about returning to Christianity and you think that these arguments don't work, how would you reach Dan? How would you say, all right, this is the reason why you should come back to Christianity?
Okay, well, this is actually how I do it. Dan is an atheist. I'm on his show right now. As far as Dan knows, I don't think I've evangelized to him even a little overtly. Now, if I'm evangelizing at all, it's totally covert. It's he's seeing my example and he's going, well, Craig seems to be a decent, reasonable guy. That's step number one. If they don't think you're a decent, reasonable human being, you aren't planting any seeds. I'm planting seeds, which is what the Bible tells you to do. Plant seeds, seed time harvest, and then give God the harvest. That's what the Bible says, actually. Give the harvest up to God, and then you pray for, so I pray for Dan. I actually do. That's 100% true. Not that much, because, whatever, there's Shannon out there. I pray for her more. Other than that, I think that's doing if I have a God job, and I've heard preachers say your God job, I think I do my God job, even with Dan. I think ultimately there's a lot that you got to leave either up to God or up to the person. Maybe he's working something out. If we're right, if you and I are right and God is real, maybe Dan needs to go through this journey and, be this dark atheist, cool atheist. He's like, friend, he's so cool with his atheist, who knows?
In other words, Craig, you just kind of have to have faith, right?
Exactly. I have faith in his, ultimately I have faith in his reasonableness. I really do. And I don't feel like I have to give the hard sell to anybody. And if people ask for the hard sell, usually find that they're full of garbage. They're trying to get you to do an argument so they can debunk you, and then you go through this pointless song and dance. I'd rather do this.
So last question for Craig before I turn to Dan. So,
well, don't take up too much time now, Dean. We got other callers.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
This is a good call. Dan.
So, Craig, do you think that, and I don't know, maybe you have or haven't heard of it, do you think that the apologetics arguments for the historicity of the resurrection are good, or do you lump them in with the Kalam, the ontological, and teleological as well?
There's a huge problem with that one. The problem is that's the least convincing aspect of Christianity. I've seen really smart Christians get smoked on that by, Apologia, who's pretty sharp. I'll give him that. But they got smoked on those arguments because that's an extraordinary leap of faith. To say, if you're talking about Jesus having risen from the dead, that's the least convincing aspect of Christianity. That is the hardest part to get over the finish line. If you're trying to convince somebody that there's reality to your faith, you should start with the easiest. I give you milk because you're not ready for solid food. Here's the easiest thing for you to accept. There's a benevolent God who loves you. People will be like, okay, I can maybe get with that. Don't go to the most challenging, and then they say, I think that's what you asked. I might have got that wrong. Did I get that wrong?
I got you. That's fine. All right, just because time is waning, Dan, real quick. So when you use the term faith, are you using the Peter Boghossian line of faith of pretending to believe things that you you don't know, or are you saying like it's a confident trust?
I'm using the Craig Reed definition of faith, I think. I think it's the just trust in a higher power, trust in things that you don't quite understand. I think that's how most Christians use the word faith. I know that there are a sect of Christians that try to use the word faith in other kinds of contexts, but the majority of my experiences leads me to conclude that Christians are, in general, using the word faith as a kind of implicit trust in something, especially a trust in something that they may or may not have good evidence or arguments or reason to believe is true.
Okay. And we can talk more about that some other time. I'll let other callers get on the line.
For sure.
Thank you guys for letting me call in and take up some chunks of time. I really appreciate the show.
Yeah, thank you, Dean. And
Awesome.
Dean, you're always welcome to call back, man. Thanks again.
All right. Thanks, man.
Yeah, get me back on the show and then call back. We'll
Yeah,
talk more.
Dean has
I'll
called
study
the
the
show
club.
before. He's a cool guy. He is one of the few Christians that right now that is a Patreon for Truth Wanted, which is awesome. I'm really proud to say that my show has Christian supporters, which you can support also, by the way, if you go to patreon.com/truthwanted. That's the thing. So definitely check that out. I don't get any of that money. All that goes straight to the ACA, helps improve shows like this and other shows on the network and makes them better. That's my quick plug there, I guess. Yeah, what'd you think of that conversation, Craig? Because this is not the first time I've actually talked to Dean about this idea of faith. Do you agree
Awesome
with my
talk.
definition of faith, or do you think that faith is something else?
I like your definition a lot. Faith has a lot of ways you can define it. One way would be like that never gets thrown around these conversations is belief in the character of God, which you kind of used in when you were defending my my sloppy witness to you, or my my sloppy like what you were kind of defending me for not giving you a hard sell, and you kind of said faith in the character of God. That's one that never gets thrown out there, but I like your definition. Yeah, it worked for me.
Okay.
Totally. That guy, I think that was a good productive call.
Yeah, that was super great. Yeah, Dean is an apologist himself, and he has called the show, and we've had discussions like that. And I like having another Christian talk to him instead of just two atheists talk to him. I think that that's really cool and really different. So I want to go ahead and go to the next call. We have so many calls, guys. We still got three more. I think this is good for the rest of the show. So you three that are still on, go ahead and stick around. I want to get to Jimmy in San Antonio. And what I have here, it says, Jimmy wants to ask me, how do I address near-death experiences on record in hospitals like Johns Hopkins? Had anything you want to add to that, Jimmy?
Well, that was how the screener took it, but what I was referring to was what they're calling complete mystical experience at Johns Hopkins.
Okay. You'll have to be more specific. I'm not sure if I'm familiar with what you're talking about.
Are you Craig at all?
I'm Dan. I'm Objectively Dan. Hi, this is Truth Wanted. This is my show. Craig is the guy over there, if you're watching.
I'm taking over the show. It's not my show yet. It's not my show yet, but I'm plotting behind the scenes. Who knows? I know what near-death experiences are, but I don't know any specific ones that you're talking about. You want to fill us in?
Sure. I was just talking about the neuroscience that's going on at Johns Hopkins University, where they're dosing people with a single pill of psilocybin, and they're claiming that they can induce an experience that's virtually identical to so-called mystical experiences reported throughout history in all of the major religions. And I was just wondering if you guys had heard about that stuff.
You know, I definitely have heard. I haven't heard of this specific case, but I've heard of something similar to it where people try to study near-death experiences from like a neuroscience perspective. From what I understand about trying to study near-death experiences from a neuroscience perspective is it's very, very hard, because usually when people are just coming out of a car accident, their first thing isn't to just stick them into an MRI machine. You know, usually they're trying to help them and get them better first. So I understand that the data on these kinds of, especially brain scans and stuff, are scarce, to say the least. I haven't heard any specific conclusions that say that near-death experiences are like real, or at least what people say they are, other than I know that people have like oxygen deprivation whenever they're going through some of these experiences that may cause some things that happen to them internally and may cause them to, you know, hallucinate or think that there's something there when there's really not.
Well, I think the screener kind of confused you. There is no near-death studies going on at Johns Hopkins, but they do speculate that it's not just about brain oxygen deprivation. That there may be endogenous release of DMT involved. I don't know if you ever heard about that.
You know, now that you're mentioning it, I probably haven't. That would make sense.
Have you called these shows before?
I might have called once before.
Because there's someone who called who was talking about a similar thing, which led me to investigate perennial philosophy. Do you know what that is?
Yes, that's actually what these professionals define
that's right, what you're talking about.
In accordance with.
Yes, that's exactly. I think it was you. Somebody called Tracy Harris a couple weeks back and started talking about a similar thing. And it led me to go to their YouTube channel and investigate perennial philosophy. And there's some really interesting stuff there in the correlations where they're finding, it's really cool. It's very interesting about mystical experiences that are very parallel to each other, faith to faith, from like a Buddhist mystical experience is very similar to a Christian mystic. And there's a lot of similarity.
That's what I'm talking about.
Yes, I thought that's what you were talking about. And psilocybin, because I personally have done not that, but I had my first quote unquote mystical experience under the influence of psychedelia when I was in high school. But I had what I thought at the time was a mystical experience, absolutely, and a couple of times thereafter when I did, mushrooms, things like that. So yeah, I agree that they're a really, really interesting avenue of study, and there's a lot of stuff that needs to be explored there fully scientifically that will lead us to new conclusions about these type of conversations. So if that's what you're saying, I'm 100% on board.
Yeah, there was there was a period of time when I was in the process of deconverting, where I used the label for myself as a Christian mystic. And the reason why I used that label was because my knowledge of God, no, seriously, this is real, Craig. Don't laugh at this. This is real. I considered my experiences to be my knowledge of God at some point. Like, I thought that it was basically my proof of God was these kind of personal experiences that I had. It wasn't until later that I came to study like neuroscience and some other kinds of natural sciences that I came to the conclusion that what I was experiencing was actually naturally explained and didn't have any other kind of supernatural or otherwise components to it.
Well, even the researchers conclude that it is a completely natural experience. They're not. I don't think if you really examine religion at its core, I don't think it was ever about anything supernatural in the sense of defying the laws of physics. If you look at the characteristics of what they call the complete mystical experiences, because it does occur on a spectrum. So the complete mystical experience involves things like a perception that's outside of space and time. And in my opinion, I think these early mystics who wrote the scripture based on these experiences got misconstrued later, and their experiences of being outside of space and time were anthropomorphized to an entity instead of seeing it as a potential in oneself. It got anthropomorphized and abstracted to some entity that's out there, out of space and time, and instead of a potential within you.
Oh, yeah. What? Go ahead, Craig. I want to hear your thoughts.
I think that's a really interesting avenue of thought, and yes, it can be argued that. Jordan Peterson touches on stuff like this too, where God is more of a personification. It's something you use to personify these type of transcendental ideas or philosophical impulses or whatever you want to say. And if you look at perennial philosophy, if you just write it into Google, there's a whole list of texts that they think are kind of track with this type of thing, and they're from all different faiths. There's like Emerson is in there, John of the Cross. I don't even remember.
I consider myself a perennialist. I study the perennial philosophy very deeply. So I study comparative religion as a hobby.
And do you think when you have you yourself had some of these experiences that other people have been describing of like being outside of space
I have.
and time?
That's the whole reason I became inspired
Interesting.
to start researching this stuff.
Okay, so like when you have these experiences, do you believe that your consciousness or your experiences are actually outside of space and of time, or do you think that's just kind of like the feeling that you're getting?
No, I like if you look at the characteristics they use in the study, they will say that the volunteers universally express this feeling of being outside in space and time. And yes, I can attest. When you're inside this experience, you have the literal impression in consciousness that there is no time. It's not like a time dilation. I brought it up to Matt Dillahunty once, and he called it a time dilation. He's like, yes, I got high before time slows down. No, that's not what I'm talking about at all. I'm talking about a literal impression of your perception being outside in space and time, temporarily, of course.
Huh. Yeah, I don't know what it would be like to be outside of space and time, since all of my experiences, as far as I know, have been inside space and time.
Well, then I would say you haven't had
ask
this
a weird
experience.
question?
Maybe. Well, that's interesting because my mysticism really came in more of the form of meditation and came in the more form of sola scriptura, like using the Bible as a form of meditation, also meditating on the scriptures and stuff like that. So that's what I mean when I had like my experiences. I never been on DMT and have had anything like you're describing.
Yeah.
When I was in high school.
Oh, go ahead.
When I was in high school, ecstasy had just come out, and we got this pharmaceutical grade ecstasy. This girl's father was a doctor, and we went to a cabin in the woods and we fasted and we took it. And I had, like, at the time, what I would describe as an extraordinarily powerful mystical experience. Looking back on it, it was just a drug experience, an intense one, but it was. So yeah, there's a very interesting line of philosophy. You're on an interesting page. I would say trying to examine it as dispassionately as humanly possible. Do you believe in God? Are you some type of a mystic yourself?
Like I said, I'm a perennialist. Because one of the key features or the core features of the mystical experience is the sense of unity with all that exists. And, we're not just talking about a sense of the here and now, but you have this impression of you're one with everything that ever was and ever will be. All time collapses into the moment in this experience. And so whatever that core thing is, you can call it God, you can call it whatever you like. Lao Tzu once said, the name that can be named is not the eternal name. But yes, I think it is synonymous with that. And I think all the major religions have had a word that point to it. Hindus call it Brahman, Buddhists call it Nirvana, the Christians call it beatific vision, and so forth.
Yeah.
Interesting stuff. I think it might have been you or somebody else that has called in about perennial philosophy before, and that was really the first time I had heard about it. And I did a little bit of research afterwards, but I didn't go super far into it. If someone were to want to look more into perennial philosophy, Jimmy, do you have any suggestions on that?
There's a Matheson website that I've gone to. You could also YouTube perennial philosophy. There's some interesting work online on YouTube. I also recommend. There's a talk by Alan Watts called Jesus and His Religion. That's on YouTube, and the book that Aldous Huxley wrote called The Perennial Philosophy is also really good.
Cool. Well, maybe one day when I'm a bit more informed on the topic, I can talk about it a little bit more. But I mean, like, that's just opening up a gateway to like a whole bunch of other subjects here. And I do want to get to these next couple callers. But Jimmy, this was an interesting conversation.
Man, appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. Please call again about this.
My call, man.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, perennial philosophy, talking about an explanation for, like, from my understanding, it's like the understanding of our conscious experiences in the universe and stuff, yada yada. A lot of words there being used in the New Age kind of circles, but like trying to find a deeper meaning to these experiences and kind of putting them into one kind of narrative that makes sense, I think is kind of the goal of that. I don't know how that fits into your Christian philosophy, if at all, Craig.
Well, before I was a Christian, I mentioned that I was reading a lot of stuff looking for God. I read like the Bhagavad Gita, the Tao Te Ching he referenced, Emerson. And then there was all these other things that, in a way, I was kind of like a perennial philosophy person. because there's a quote from William Blake, all religions are one. And that's how I was starting to perceive. I call it, I was becoming intellectually convinced that there was a God, but that's how I was starting to perceive it, because I was starting to see all these similarities between, there's a lot of different, like, Sufi mystics are very similar, have similar experiences to, people who take peyote in the desert. And it's a really interesting line of exploration. With him, like I said, it needs to be done dispassionately, because you can jump to wild conclusions.
I think you're right.
Even Sam Harris has his book, this Buddhist book, which is along the same lines. It's not that dissimilar. It's atheist, but he starts talking about meditation and slowing down your brain and the actual physiological reality of it. And I read that book too, and it's sort of in a similar vein. So
interesting.
That guy tends to get hung up on. If that's the same guy who got me interested in perennial philosophy, he got hung up on like 4 or 5 times. But he was killing our show, but he got hung up on everywhere else.
Yeah, it's cool. It's interesting. I wish I had more time to talk about this stuff, but I do want to get to these next 2 callers here. And this next one is from Tim. Tim has called in before. Last time Tim called, he was telling a buck wild story about some of the stuff that was going on in his pagan group. And now it looks like, Tim, you want to talk about the progression of, the sun through Bible stories and Christianity. Maybe you could explain about that a bit more, Tim.
Okay, so apparently the person who took my call wasn't quite sure how to type it all out.
Sure.
Actually, it's the progression of the ages, progression of the sun through the ages. In other words, the zodiac, and its relationship to the stories of the Bible, and what really struck me was the fact that when I looked at the progression of the sun into the age of Taurus, or into the age of, Aries, which is the ram, and the end of the age of Taurus, because the sun progresses opposite of what we progress through the year. We go Aries, Taurus, but the sun progresses Taurus, Aries. And so at the time of the age of Taurus, it was moving from the age of, forgive me if I'm wrong on this, but it would be Cancer, and so then we moved into the age of Taurus, but then we moved into the age of Aries. And at that time is the exact time of the supposed rise of Moses and the exodus of the Hebrews from Egypt into the land, into the promised land.
So if I could summarize, really shortly, what you're trying to get to is, do you think that there might be some sort of connection between biblical stories and like
the
astrological kind of elements to that?
Yes.
Okay.
And as I progress through this story, you'll find out. So, because I tend to get a little wordy, and I'm sorry about that. But anyway, so the story of Moses and the golden calf, so to speak, was the killing of the age of Taurus. What is Taurus? It's the bull. And then it is the coming of the age of Aries, which is the ram. What is the one thing that we really identify the Jewish faith with, but the ram's horn and the shofar and the blowing of the shofar during Rosh Hashanah? And then we fast forward a little bit, about 2,000 years, into the change from the age of Aries into the age of Pisces, which is fish. What is the one symbol that is represented by Jesus, but the fish.
Hmm.
So we are then moving from the age of the ram, the Aries, the shofar, into the fish, which is the ichthus, the very representation of Jesus. And Jesus was the last lamb slaughtered to end the age of Aries. And that is also, when you look at the entire story of the birth of Jesus as well as the death of Jesus, it is actually the sun god, the mythos of every religion within that region.
Every religion within that region.
Yes. Adonis, Bacchus, Dionysus, Osiris.
Okay. So let me ask you this, Tim.
Yes.
Do you think these signs were intentionally designed in the way that they were so that they could match up with these biblical stories, or was it the other way around?
I think the biblical stories were matched up with the signs. I think the stories were matched up and written because of the fact that within that region, all of these sun god mythos were written about the same time, if not even earlier, like thousands of years earlier. Well, hundreds of years earlier, anyway. To create, it was an anthropomorphication of what was going on within the skies.
Okay.
We were moving from the age of Aries into the age of Pisces, and the sun god mythos were created. That is Dionysus. That is Apollo.
Go ahead, Craig.
Go ahead.
So these are astrological, like in the 60s, that was supposed to be the dawning of the age of Aquarius. Why? So what's going on? It's an epoch, and it's 100 or so years, and it's just what matches that sign, sort of, that people are more inclined to be.
I'll ask this, just to kind of reorganize this conversation here on where I think we should go with this. I'll give you my thoughts first, and then I'd like to hear thoughts from Craig. I am immediately skeptical when people usually present to me ideas of kind of a syncretism of religion. This idea that all of these different religions can all be crammed together in some sort of way, or this was all kind of designed or all kind of inspired from the same sources, because I think, and for the most part, and I don't know if this is true with what you presented me here, Tim, because I haven't looked into it, obviously, but for the most part, when I see these things, for example, when people are saying Jesus is actually Osiris from the Egyptian mythology and stuff, it's kind of BS. Like, if you look at the details of these things, it kind of doesn't work. And also, sometimes these cultures actually didn't have any interaction with each other and stuff. And I'm more willing to bet that different religions had different kind of coincidental religious ideas. I mean, we were talking earlier on the last call about people having these kind of universal experiences with the one true God or being of the universe. And that seems to crop up in a couple different kinds of religions. I don't think that all these necessarily have to be inspired by each other. I think people can independently come to these kinds of conclusions, especially when we're talking about something like the sun. You know, the sun is something that everybody sees. And I can very clearly see how people can kind of attribute different things to the sun and their own kind of cultures and religions, and these can kind of sometimes coincide with each other because we're all observing the sun and we're all observing its similar characteristics at different parts on Earth. What do you think about this idea, Craig?
Oh, and
did he go? Did he disappear? I'm not 100% sure what he was trying to say. I think he was. Whereas perennial philosophy is kind of like bottom down, like these people are having organic experiences that they're describing as religious or mystical in different places that have similarities. He seemed to be saying, as far as I could tell, I don't really know if this is what he meant, but that there was some sort of top down, like Osiris is Jesus matched with Dionysus because Jesus is like a completion of all these. I didn't quite get it, and I didn't quite get how it tied into the astrological eras.
Okay, so I can
I
explain
don't really understand.
very simply. I can explain it by saying that people look at the progression of what is going on within the stars, within the movement of the sun, with the seasons of the earth, and they look at it and they anthropomorphize that.
Mm-hmm.
And they do that within their own certain regions.
For sure.
And the reasons why we have certain gods like Bacchus, Dionysus, Osiris, Jesus, is because they are looking at the movement of the stars. They're looking at the progression, the precession of the sun through the ages. And yes, as far as the age of Aquarius, they were talking about the age of Aquarius in the 60s, but that's not when it happened. In fact, many people think that it happened somewhere between 2012 and will go into 2060. So it's where the sun is in the progression of the astrological sign.
Okay, Tim. Okay. Let me ask you this, Tim. If this is true and Christianity actually was built kind of around these astrological signs, I'm assuming Judaism is acting the same way. Why isn't this made explicitly clear within these religions? Why are no Christians today really actively promoting this belief? And why do I not see any really reference to the sun or like worship of the sun within biblical stories? Like obviously the sun is referenced, but never in I think the extreme religious significance that I think that you and maybe other people might give it.
Well, good question. And the answer to that would be the power and the money that's available by simply holding to these beliefs. The reason why Catholicism and thus Christianity throughout the ages, throughout the last 2,000 years, has been so strong is because the emperor at the time, Constantine, decided that, oh, hey, you know what? There's money to be had and there's control to be had if I go with this particular myth. Now, he already knew that it was a myth. There were already mythos involved with the sun gods that were very prevalent at that time. However, at that time, which was about 300 years after the time that Jesus was supposed to have been born, and only about 200 to 150 years after the first story had been written about Jesus, did it become a thing that would possibly become powerful and would give him more power, more money, more control over all of his subjects.
I'm kind of confused here, Tim. How does changing the history of Christianity from being about the sun to being about what it is now give Constantine more power over his kingdom?
All about dollars, Dan.
But how does that make him money? I'm kind of confused.
Because capitalize. Now he can cash. You just start thinking entrepreneurially.
But you can cash in with the sun stuff. There's people that do that with astrology right now.
But he can cash in even more now that he's got the son of God. See how it works?
Okay.
And then
gotta think like capital. You gotta think about money. Four-man atheist with integrity. It doesn't quite make sense. You're not thinking about capitalizing on the market.
Right.
Go. Yes. I mean, really what it's all about is the controllable who are ignorant. People didn't know things back then. It was, you had to know how to read in order to be educated back then. And all you had to do was have the priests tell you what is true. And once you had once you had the emperor telling the priests that they needed to say this to their subjects, then their subjects were absolutely under their own control.
I don't know if I'm buying this one, Tim. I personally have done a lot of study on the history of Christianity as a religion, and I don't think there's any biblical scholarship that I know of that currently supports what you're talking about. Do you have any evidence that any of this ever occurred?
The Council of Nicaea.
What does the Council of Nicaea have to do with Emperor Constantine changing things from being about the Son to being about the Son of God?
Okay, so Constantine, it was not about the Son. It was all about moving it from Zeus, who frankly is a weather god, and Apollo, who frankly is a sun god, to only one god who is...
Wait, hold on. This happened at the Council of Nicaea?
Oh, all of this happened at the Council of Nicaea.
Okay, well, everything I've ever read about the Council of Nicaea has never told me that they're talking about moving Zeus and other gods into Christianity. I don't know about that one.
Well, what they were doing, why Constantine started the Council of Nicaea in the first place was to make Christianity the religion within the Roman Empire.
Yeah, I understand that much of it. I think for the most part I agree with that statement, but I don't know of Emperor Constantine actually ever mandating any doctrine and specifically changing the religion himself to fit his needs. I'm sure that he had...
The classic story is that he had a conversion. He saw a cross in the sky, and he legitimately became a Christian. You're saying it's not true that he had some sort of far-reaching entrepreneurial scam where now he was gonna, I don't know. I don't get how he capitalized on it. But
well, of course he capitalized on it because it is proven within history that he capitalized on it. The Roman Empire became bigger, and then after that came the Catholic Church that actually controlled most of the monarchy in Europe once Rome fell.
But that was like 1,000 years after Constantine, though.
It was it was a little less than 1,000 years, but yes.
Yeah.
But at the same time, you still had the Christian Church growing. You still had the Catholic. Let me put it this way: you still had Constantine's vision of what he wanted, which was you needed to believe in this Jesus who is now. I'm not saying that he purposely said, okay, we need to negate Zeus for this. However, if you look at the history, yes, in fact, he really did say we need to negate Zeus for Jesus.
I don't know, Tim. I don't know. I've read some history of my time. I haven't encountered that. I'm not convinced right now. I'm not saying that this isn't what actually happened. You could be totally right. But when we talk about this next time, and I hope that we can talk about this more because we do have to go to our next caller now. But maybe we could talk a little bit more about sources and how we are coming to these conclusions. Because I'll be honest with you, I've read a lot about this. I've never encountered this before. And if this is true, I think that there needs to be more, because there's a lot of people that say, oh, people make up religions for money and stuff. And like, that's a cop-out to me. I think people need to explain motivations a little bit more with evidence and stuff. But Tim, we do have to go on right now, Tim. But again, I appreciate you calling. This was an interesting call. And I do want to talk about this some other time, though. Is that all right, Tim?
Sure.
Okay. Sorry to be short with you, Tim. We got to wrap things up with the show here. We'll see you some other time. Yeah. I don't know, man. I don't know. It's like, I hear this.
Scholarship, as far as I know, the standard scholarship is that he had a legitimate conversion. Whether you believe that's what he believed.
Yes.
If you're going to think something else happened, that's fine. But you got to bring more to the table than you got to give us why, what you read it in and why, and where that's coming from.
Yeah. And I also agree that you can maybe fit into some of these star signs these stories in the Bible and how there's these similar symbols and stuff.
I didn't
But like,
really get that.
I don't know. Like I could say, I don't know. Jesus put demons into the pigs that went into the lake. You know that story. And Jesus was talking about the Chinese year of the pig. You know, I think I could kind of do this with
I
kinds
didn't
of
really
things.
get what he was going with all of that, where he
I
was
don't know.
tying them all together. I didn't understand it that clearly.
Well, maybe next time we could have a more livid discussion, lively discussion is what I mean about these kinds of topics, because I think it is interesting, but I just need more than what was going on there to kind of convince me of this. Let's go ahead and go to our last call, though. This is Adam in North Carolina. Adam comes up with a great question. He's asking me how to react to well-meaning sentiments like you must have had someone watching over you after escaping after a car accident. Is that right, Adam?
Yeah, and I wanted to thank both you and Craig. Craig and I have chatted before via online, and thank you both for being here and giving such a positive experience for all of us. I had someone I told today, I told them I was in a car accident, and when I told them how bad it was, they said, you must have someone watching over you. And rather than me being like, no, I don't believe that, I kind of said, yeah, I guess so. And I kind of caught myself because, I don't know, I don't want to be rude in public. I don't believe what they believe. But I think many of us have, and there's something I want to get to after this, so I'll mention that after this.
Okay.
But many of us don't want to be confrontational in the real world. It's very nice what she said to me, but I didn't want to confront her and be like, I don't believe in your God.
Yeah.
I just said, yeah, I guess so. And I kind of caught myself, and I almost felt like I was lying, but I think many people encounter atheists or non-believers, and they don't even realize it in their everyday life, because
For sure.
the internet's a whole different world.
Yeah. So this question is better probably for me than it is for Craig. I don't know how much Craig can weigh in on this.
Well, can I say something before you start?
Yeah, go ahead, Craig.
I think that just as a general rule, I think that's totally the right call. Irrespective of what the person said that you don't believe, the heart, you perceive that they were saying it kind of to be nice to you or be for your benefit. If you think that that's what somebody's doing, like if someone said to me, you know, something that I really didn't believe, and they were doing it to be nice and offer me solace or consoling, I would take that into consideration with how I responded, whether I believe what they believed or not. So it sounds like that's what you did. I think that's the right judgment call, personally, and just be polite in the situation. Go ahead, Dan.
Yeah, my 2 cents on it is, you know, and I'm at the point now where it's like, if someone were to ever ask me what I think about things, I mean, I have a whole show now talking about this kind of stuff. So I think about this a lot more than some people do, right? It's like, you know, these kinds of things happen a lot. But like, yeah, you know, we are unfortunately a minority, especially in the United States. And people often, I mean, we can pass as Christians. I think what it is, especially where I'm from, most people just assume you're Christian. I don't think that was in Craig's case, but definitely here in the great state of Texas, that's kind of the case. Most people you run into, chances are they're going to be a Christian here, and they think that you are too. And it's not like you're going to have an atheist T-shirt on you all the time, or you know, come up with Dawkins quotes or something. I don't know. Like, we aren't as easy to identify, and sometimes we really don't want to identify because it's not safe. And it can be kind of rude, right? It can be like, oh yeah, I don't believe in anything you just told me, but thanks anyway, I guess. You know, nobody wants to be that guy. I think you just have to approach it from a, well, I appreciate the sentiment kind of thing. And you don't have to you don't have to confirm anything she's actually saying. You don't have to be like, oh yeah, I agree, this was great. Thanks for the watching over. You know, I think you just have to kind of say like, oh yeah, thank you. You know, really appreciate it, and just kind of move on. I mean, especially if it's somebody I don't know very well, there's just really no point in getting into it right then and there, right? It sucks because you should be able to defend yourself, and you should be able to say like, yes, like I wouldn't go to. I don't know. I wouldn't go to if I was a Christian again, I wouldn't want to go to a Buddhist and say, oh, yes, the Christian God is watching over you. You know, like that, to me, that would be rude. But we don't always have that same respect for atheists in this country because sometimes it seems like the way that we feel about things don't matter. But it does matter. And we can talk about this stuff all day. And yeah, it's just one of those things, man. You just kind of have to move on. You know, there's not much you can do.
Well, and I really appreciate that, and I think that's the way to handle it. And I think the biggest thing with this is there's a lot of people who don't believe, and like she probably thinks that I totally believe. She's probably like, oh, you totally believe her. He like believes in the same God I do. Yet they see these atheists online, like, wow, these atheists are so mean, so like mean-spirited and yelling at people.
Tell me about it.
And I think I'm going to do a total transition to topic right here. This is a 180. Because one thing I really wanted to mention to you guys before you go, and I want to thank you for your time, is the whole mystical experience thing, because I've actually read up on all the research by Ronald R. Griffiths, who's a PhD who does research at Johns Hopkins. And he gives people doses of psilocybin, which is the last call or 2 calls ago you had. Mm-hmm. And here's the thing. They measure these mystical experiences with the MEQ30. And I didn't expect to talk to you about this until I heard the call when I was on hold. And I've read up on this because I've actually encountered the person you spoke with many of times. They were actually the first call hung up by Matt Dillahunty on the Atheist Experience this year. And Woo! Here's the thing. Yeah. So here's the thing. The MEQ30 has a lot of stuff on it. Things like factor 2 is positive mood. So I want to know, Dan, from you, I'm going to ask you a few questions here.
Yeah.
Have you ever taken a drug that gave you an experience of amazement?
Okay. Are you a cop?
No, I'm not.
Okay.
No, totally. But you know, I could be a cop. I mean, this is totally like To Catch a Predator. I could totally be a cop.
It depends on what you mean by experience of amazement, I guess.
Like,
I don't know what
you have like awe and like any sort of awe or amazement with taking a drug.
I'm so great. This is amazing.
I'm just going to answer yes. I'm not going to get any more specific than that. How about that?
3% right now.
How about that?
Have you ever experienced ecstasy while taking a drug of any sort?
I've never experienced ecstasy, the drug. I've experienced ecstasy, the feeling.
Have you ever had feelings of joy?
Sure.
These are actual questions on the MEQ30, which is the Mystical Experience Questionnaire 30.
No kidding.
For them to figure out that someone had a complete mystical experience. The other questions are things like, I'm literally reading it right now, loss of your usual sense of time, loss of your usual sense of space, loss of a usual awareness of where you are. And actually,
I feel that all the time. I don't have to be on drugs to feel that.
Right? Never knows where he is. He's on Twitter. He's like, where am I?
Drugs? Sorry, I'm being loud.
Yeah, you're good.
Well, they're giving people these drugs. Dr. Ronald Griffiths is, and they're giving them this high dose. And people aren't even achieving all of these because I actually have the research pulled up, and I'm on the timestamp, which shows the graphic of the scatter plot. And it doesn't even show people are hitting a 30, which is a complete mystical experience, 30 out of 30 qualities from the mystical experience. And here's the thing. When you're on drugs, you feel like you're on drugs. That doesn't mean you're connected to a mystical world. That's my opinion.
Yeah, I have to agree with you, Adam. If you feel like you're in another world and you're on drugs, I think it's the drugs. Like, some people, I don't know why, there's whole kinds of movements of people trying to unlock something more than that. And there are other kinds of people who are like, yeah, it's just the drugs, and they don't go farther than that. I agree with you. It seems like we have a clear cause and effect relationship going on here. It's the drugs.
Well, that's the claim that the last caller was making, that these experiences that people have that have been on drugs in the past and are on drugs currently, these experiences, which we call mystical, connect to a mystical world. And, here's my answer. Maybe, but how the hell do we know?
Yeah.
So, no, I agree with you. I don't think so. Like, if I had to give my best guess, I think it's that you're on drugs.
If we can't tell what the mystical world is without being on the drugs, you know what I mean? Like, if a sober person can't analyze the mystical world the other person's talking about, then I think the dude is just on drugs. Like, I think that's just all it is. I think people try to make bigger meanings out of their experiences, and I think that's a very human thing to do. But sometimes, I'm just going to say it again, people are just on drugs. I think some people who have called in tonight are on drugs, but that's with every week, to be honest with you. I think, yeah, for sure. What do you think about this, Craig?
Two things. First off, you should have said to that girl, you got any evidence? That would have been the best thing to say. And then I've actually been on the inside of those experiences, though. And like I said, in my own subjective point of view, when I took different types of psychedelics, mushrooms, acid, ecstasy, I considered those, when I was having them, mystical experiences. I considered them not necessarily like I'm in touch with God, man, but there's
Jesus take the wheel at any point?
Yeah. Jesus take the drugs. Jesus take the drugs. Guy's gonna trip out. So I don't know. There's definitely some sort of interesting correlation between psilocybin in particular, DMT, the stuff he's talking about, and if you go look at the perennial philosophy, all different traditions, they kind of talk about some of the same things. So there's definitely something there worth exploring from a scientific. My advice to him is be as dispassionate as possible. Don't jump to, dude, this is God because I'm just feeling it, man, because I'm like tripping so hard. Just don't jump to that.
Can I ask a question of Craig real quick?
Yeah, go for it.
Craig, do you think maybe drugs create similar experiences in people among cultures? Like people, irregardless of culture, would have a similar experience on a drug. Thus, when they report the experience, that experience would be similar. And it could be that they're experiencing a God, or it could be that the drug just creates similar experiences. Like, does that seem reasonable?
Absolutely. Yeah, people will have similar experiences on from different cultures on drugs, but the correlation between that and mystical experiences is strong enough that it should be explored. And there are different types of mystical experiences that tend to be similar in wildly different cultures. Like you would think Islam and a Doors concert have nothing to do with one another, but you find out that there's Sufi mystics who do this sort of rhythmic dance, sort of orgiastic dance, and you're like, hey, that sounds exactly like a Doors concert, and they're getting some of the same effects. So there's something there that needs to be explored. That's all, scientifically. We're on an atheist, so I say scientifically, not by faith, not through prayer, through science, right? Science.
Yeah, I think listen to this guy, dude. Listen to this guy. He sounds like he's been on this atheist thing for a while now, but he's not. That's crazy. I don't know.
To reply to that shortly, and Craig, thank you very much. I respect you a ton, and also you, Dan. I think the box that we put what we call mystic into is a very large box, and I think it does encompass things like religious experiences and Doors concerts, which I wish I'd gone to one, but yes, they would be amazing. And so I think it's a very large box, and I think that's the problem, that mystic is not well defined.
But
Agreed.
Doesn't it work to people's advantage when they're trying to make money off of you? I think that's something to consider as well. I'm not calling anybody in particular out. I'm just saying, there is a whole specific industry of people who try to put all of this stuff in the box like you're describing, and that way they can reach to the biggest audience possible and kind of draw people into these ideas. And cults too. Like, this is how a lot of modern cults function. Most modern cults don't have a set ideology of principles, at least the ones that are invented in modern times. A lot of them, you'll notice, include a whole bunch of different ideas and aren't afraid to be as syncretic. And I think it works to people's advantage. I know we were talking about how I'm skeptical of people that claim, oh, everyone's just doing it for the money. There definitely are people who do it for the money. And it's usually the ones who are talking about the mystical experiences types. That's what I seem to find,
I agree. And thank you guys so much for your time and for the show, both of you, Craig and Dan. Thank you very much.
Absolutely, Adam. That was a fantastic call. Please call again sometime. That was just really, really good. Man, that about wraps it up for this episode of Truth Wanted. I want to ask Craig one more question before we wrap it up, though, because we're talking about these mystical experiences. And we're talking about how some of it is kind of BS or just can be explained through natural things. And you mentioned that you had your own kind of personal experiences, Craig. Do you think your personal experiences could be explained by natural phenomenon, or do you really think it was something else?
Well, it depends. That's why I was trying to do the ones that I had prior to me becoming a Christian that were drug related. Mm-hmm. Looking back on them, I don't consider those legitimate God experience. I don't consider those spiritual experiences. I just brought them up because at the time I did. The times at the church where I've had experiences with the Holy Spirit, no, I consider those real spiritual experiences for sure.
Okay, cool.
There may be a couple in there. There's sometimes even at a church where there's some legitimate spiritual stuff going on. There's some times, which I'm sure you've experienced, where people get caught up in the emotions. And they, there was one time where this, not necessarily the woman was a false prophet, but this prophet came and everyone was all psyched for this famous prophet. I don't remember who it was. And everyone sort of started scamming the experiences. Everyone was kind of like freaking out.
I had to say
and
which one, because I think that's happened more than once, my friend. You know?
Yeah, well, because you can do both. I mean, that's why I said this needs to be explored ideally scientifically, but dispassionate on both ends. You know, you can't explore it from there's no such thing as a legitimate spiritual experience, because then you're not exploring it dispassionately from that end. You need to explore it from both ends dispassionately. It's not proof positive of God, or it can't possibly be God. So there's something to be explored on both ends. And just from my own personal experience with Christian spiritual experiences, there are definitely times where the Christians are scamming, where they're all ginned up on, you know, here's the new exciting prophet in town, and I want to show everybody how spiritual I am, so I'm going to kind of fake my way. You know, Jesus, I love you so much. You know, you see that happen a lot. That happens. So be skeptical, Dan.
All
be
right.
skeptical.
Listen,
If I have a message for the crowd,
am I in Bizarro Truth Wanted? What's going on? Why? This is so strange that I'm hearing this from you, Craig, but I love it. This was a fantastic episode, man. We need to make this
because it's the best show out there. That's why, because you have an open-ended type of conversation, which is what I think you really want to have, where, you know, people just talk from their own experiences. So it leads to different types of conversations along these lines, and I think it's really good. I think it's all.
I really appreciate it, Craig. That means a lot. What a perfect way to wrap up this episode, guys. This was Truth Wanted. I'm Objectively Dan. This is my show. Every week we talk to people about what they believe and why. This is a live call-in show, so if you missed us this week, try to get us next week. We are live every Friday at 7 p.m. Central. If you want to get in touch with me, I'm on Twitter at ObjectivelyDan. Definitely follow me there. I'm pretty active on there. We have a Truth Wanted Facebook group you can join as well. If you want to get in touch with me, if you have questions about the show or you just want to talk to me, my email is truth@atheist-community.org. Definitely check that out. And of course, please subscribe to Truth Wanted. And we got a Patreon as well. If you want to go to www.patreon.com/truthwanted, you can give to the show and you can get ad-free versions of the show from there. Every little bit helps, guys. And it all goes not just to me, but also to other shows on the network too. Craig, where can people find you at?
If you want to find me on Twitter, you can find me at Craig Reed at Craig Reed Holy. And then I have a YouTube channel, Craig Reed, The Christian Response. Some of this stuff we brought up tonight, I'm going to be dealing with perennial philosophy. I've been looking into mystical experiences. I'm starting to read up more about. It's not an atheist geared channel, but I try to always keep in mind that there are atheists listening when I do my thing. And coming up, for example, the great Apologia is going to be, I'm going to be interviewing him next Monday. So look for that. That's going to be off the charts.
Awesome.
And then I'm debating Jim Majors. He's a pretty big deal in the atheist community, I believe, in 2 days on Sunday.
Wow. Neat.
Yeah,
okay.
He's pretty cool.
Well, guys, that about wraps it up for another fantastic episode. Fantastic episode of Truth Wanted. Really, really great stuff. Remember, guys, always keep wanting the truth, and I'll see you next week. Thanks again, everybody.